I stood in my white dress, gripping the bouquet as the music swelled, only to watch him grab the microphone and laugh. He announced I was too pathetic to be his wife, and the entire hall fell silent. I did not cry. Instead, I realized this was the perfect moment to strike. He smirked, completely unaware that everything he was standing on, from the venue to his very lifestyle, actually belonged to me. My name is Tessa Langford, and 29 years of playing by the rules had led me to the polished mahogany doors of Lakeshore and Vine, exactly 10 minutes late to my own pre-wedding celebration. My phone was still warm in my hand, the screen glowing with the confirmation of the biggest contract my company, Northwind Social, had ever secured. It was a six-figure deal to coordinate a massive corporate merger gala, the kind of money that cemented my reputation in the city. I should have been walking in there on air. I should have been practically floating toward the man I was going to marry in 48 hours. Instead, I was checking my reflection in the darkened glass of the entryway, smoothing down a dress that cost more than my first car. I took a breath, composing the smile that people expected from a bride-to-be. Grant had texted me 3 times saying he was busy networking with the guys and that I should not rush. That was Grant Holloway for you, always the supportive partner, always making sure I felt comfortable focusing on my work while he handled the social heavy lifting, or so I told myself. I pushed through the doors. The restaurant was dim, smelling of truffle oil, expensive cologne, and the hushed, heavy atmosphere of old money. Our party was in the semi-private alcove near the back, a space separated from the main dining floor by a high, velvet-upholstered banquette. I moved silently across the plush carpet. Years of managing events had taught me how to move through a room without drawing attention until I was ready to be seen. It was a skill that usually served me well in checking on catering staff or fixing a centerpiece. Tonight, it would be the thing that dismantled my entire life. I approached the booth from behind. I could see the back of Grant's head. His hair was perfectly styled, the cut fresh from the stylist I had booked and paid for earlier that week. He was holding a glass of scotch, my preferred brand, aged 18 years, and leaning in toward his groomsman, there was Julian, his best friend from college, Marcus, who claimed to be an investment banker but mostly just invested in happy hours, and a few others from the circle Grant called his elite network. I was about to reach out and touch his shoulder, to whisper an apology for being late, when Grant's voice carried clearly over the low hum of jazz music. "Honestly, it is exhausting," he said, and there was a sneer in his tone I had never heard before. "You guys do not understand the level of patience I have, crying about her spreadsheets, talking about floral arrangements like it is life or death, crying over deadlines. It is just small." I froze. My hand hovered inches from his charcoal suit jacket. Julian laughed, swirling his drink. "Come on, man. She is nice enough. And she pays for the good stuff." "That is the only reason I'm still sitting here," Grant replied, and the ice in his glass clinked as he gestured dismissively. "But let us be real. Marrying her? It feels like a demotion. It is lowering my standards. Look at her. She is just plain. She is pathetic. Really. Trying so hard to be something she is not. Standing next to her at the altar is going to make me look like I settled for the help." The air left my lungs. It was not a gasp. It was a silent evacuation of oxygen. I stood there, rooted to the floor, waiting for someone, anyone, to correct him. I waited for Marcus to say that was uncalled for. I waited for Julian to remind him that I had planned Julian's sister's baby shower for free last month. Instead, Marcus chuckled. "So, why go through with the big day then, if she is such a drag?" "Because I need the timing to be right," Grant said, his voice dropping lower, conspiratorial and cruel. "I am not just going to leave. That is too easy. I am planning something dramatic. I want to end it in a way that makes it clear it is her fault. I want her to be so humiliated she just packs up and disappears. I need her to feel so small that she does not even think about asking for half the assets." "Savage," one of the other guys muttered, but he sounded impressed, not disgusted. "You have to be," Grant said, taking a long sip of the scotch I had bought. Otherwise, she will cling. You know how these desperate types are. She thinks she rescued me or something just because she handles the bills. It is pathetic. I felt a physical sensation of cold wash over me, starting at the base of my neck and sliding down my spine. It was not heartbreak. Heartbreak is hot. It burns and stings. This was clarity. It was absolute zero. I looked at the men around the table. These were people I had hosted at my apartment. I had cooked for them. When they wanted to go to the Hamptons last summer, I was the one who put the deposit on the rental because Grant's card was having security issues. When Marcus got a DUI, Grant had asked me to call my family lawyer to help him out. They were eating appetizers I was paying for, drinking alcohol I had selected, wearing suits I had likely subsidized in some roundabout way, and laughing as my fiancé called me pathetic. "Speaking of assets," Julian said, leaning in, "did you secure the honeymoon refund policy? Or is that on her card too?" "It is on her black card," Grant scoffed. "Everything is. That is the beauty of it. When I blow this up, I walk away clean. She is the one left holding the receipts." That was the moment the floor stopped spinning. I did not step forward. I did not throw a drink in his face. I did not scream. The Tessa Langford, who would have done those things, died in that hallway, right between the coat check and the maitre d' station. I took one step back, then another. The carpet absorbed the sound of my heels. I turned around and walked back toward the entrance, my movements mechanical but steady. "Ms. Langford?" the hostess chirped as I passed her. "Your party is just—" "I forgot something in the car," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, calm and professional, the same voice I used when telling a client that their preferred venue had burned down, but I had a backup ready. "I will be right back." I pushed out into the cool evening air. The city noise hit me. Sirens, laughter, the rumble of traffic, but it felt distant. I walked half a block down the street, away from the restaurant windows, and leaned against the brick wall of a closed boutique. I looked down at my left hand. The diamond on my finger glittered under the street lamp. It was a beautiful ring. I remembered the day he gave it to me. He had told me he saved for 6 months. I remembered crying, feeling so cherished. I pulled out my phone. I did not call my mother. I did not call my best friend. I opened the Notes app and created a new file. I typed the header, liquidation. Then I started listing. 1. The apartment lease. It was in my name. Grant had said his credit score was being optimized for a business loan, and it would be better if he did not have a hard inquiry. I paid the $4,500 a month. He transferred me his share whenever he had a good month, which was rarely. 2. The car. The Rover he drove to meet clients. My name was on the title. My name was on the loan. He drove it to look successful. I paid the $700 a month to keep him looking that way. 3. The credit cards. He was an authorized user on my Amex and my Chase Sapphire. He said it was for household emergencies and building our future. I scrolled through the banking app now. There was a charge from 2 hours ago at a high-end cigar shop. $300. Emergency cigars, apparently. 4. The wedding contracts, the venue, the catering, the florist, the band, all of it signed by Tessa Langford, owner of Northwind Social. 5. Northwind Social itself. He had been pushing lately to be added as a consultant on paper, claiming it would help with tax brackets. Thank God I had been too busy to file the paperwork. I looked at the list. It was not a list of shared responsibilities. It was a ledger of parasitism. I realized then that I did not have a partner. I had a dependent, a very expensive, very ungrateful dependent who hated the hand that fed him. He called me pathetic. Pathetic was a man who had to degrade the woman who put the clothes on his back just to feel tall. He wanted a dramatic ending. He wanted to humiliate me to ensure I would run away and not ask questions. He wanted to break me so I would be too ashamed to expose him. I closed my eyes and let the wind whip a few strands of hair across my face. The hurt was there, deep and throbbing, a dull ache in the center of my chest where my trust used to be. But rising above it was something else, a cold, hard resolve. It felt like the steel of a skyscraper skeleton. If I went in there now and confronted him, he would spin it. He would say he was joking, that it was locker room talk, or he would gaslight me into thinking I was crazy. He would cause a scene, play the victim, and walk away with his dignity intact while I looked like the hysterical woman. No. He wanted a stage? I would give him the biggest stage of his life. He wanted to end it publicly? I would ensure the audience was captivated. He thought he was the director of this show, but he forgot who owned the theater. I put my phone back in my clutch. I smoothed my dress again. I checked my makeup in the reflection of the shop window. The woman staring back at me did not look pathetic. She looked like a CEO who had just found a massive discrepancy in the audit and was preparing to fire the employee responsible. I turned back toward Lakeshore and Vine. I would walk in there. I would kiss his cheek. I would buy a round of drinks for his friends. I would smile and play the part of the oblivious, adoring, pathetic little fiancé for exactly 48 more hours. And then, when the lights were brightest, I would show him exactly what happens when you bite the hand that signs the checks. Looking back, I can pinpoint the exact moment the trap snapped shut. It was not amidst the cold realization outside the restaurant tonight. It happened 3 years ago. Under the warm, deceptive glow of string lights at a rooftop industry mixer in downtown Chicago. It was the spring of 2022. Northwind Social was still in its infancy, a scrappy little startup operating out of my living room, and I was hungry for connections. I was standing near the bar, nursing a watered-down tonic, when Grant Holloway walked in. He did not just enter a room, he curated it. He was wearing a navy bespoke suit that fit him like a second skin. The kind of tailoring that whispers money rather than shouting it. He moved with a shark-like confidence, cutting through the sea of nervous entrepreneurs and desperate freelancers. When he stopped next to me, he did not ask what I did. He told me he liked my shoes because they looked like they meant business. That was the hook. We spent 2 hours talking in the corner, or rather, he talked, and I listened, mesmerized. He told me he was in the final stages of launching Holloway Advisory, a boutique consulting firm designed to optimize executive performance. He used words like synergy, scalability, and high-level acquisition with such casual authority that I felt lucky just to be standing in his orbit. He made me feel like we were the only two serious people in a room full of amateurs. For the first 6 months, Grant was the perfect picture of the modern gentleman. He was aggressive with his generosity. He took me to steak dinners where the bill was easily $400 and slapped his platinum card down before the waiter could even ask. He bought me a vintage necklace for our 1-month anniversary, telling me it matched my eyes. He talked about our future constantly, not as a vague dream, but as a strategic roadmap. He painted a picture of us as a power couple, a dynasty in the making. I fell for it. I fell for the version of himself he projected on the wall. I did not know then that I was falling in love with a marketing campaign, not a man. The first crack in the facade appeared in late autumn. We were at a wine bar, celebrating a small milestone for my company. When the check came, Grant patted his pockets, his brow furrowing in a performance of confusion that deserves an Academy Award. He laughed, a self-deprecating sound. He said he must have left his wallet in his gym bag. He said it was so embarrassing. He said the wire transfer from a major client, a tech giant he could not legally name, was stuck in international clearing, so his liquid cash was momentarily tied up. I smiled and handed the waiter my card. I told him it was fine. I told him I got this one. It felt good to treat him for once, to show him I could keep up. He kissed my hand and told me I was the most understanding woman he had ever met. He made my financial contribution feel like an act of emotional intimacy. That was the temporary setback. Then came the restructuring phase. Grant told me the consulting market was shifting, and he needed to pivot. He claimed his biggest client had paused a contract due to internal audits. He needed a few months of runway to realign his strategy. I was working 60 hours a week at that point. I was up at 5 a.m. answering emails, coordinating vendors, and physically hauling decor to event sites. I was exhausted, but I was making money, real money, and because I was so busy building my own empire, I did not have the energy to inspect the foundation of his. The request started small. He needed help with his phone bill because he was switching carriers and the autopay got messed up. Then it was groceries. He started suggesting we cook at my place more often because he wanted to focus on us, which really meant he wanted to eat premium ribeye steaks that I paid for. Then came the apartment. Grant insisted that to land high-ticket clients, he needed an address that commanded respect. He found a gorgeous 2-bedroom loft with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. The rent was $4,500 a month. When it came time to sign the lease, he pulled me aside, looking stressed but stoic. He told me his credit score had taken a minor hit because of a misunderstanding with a previous business partner, a lawsuit he was totally going to win. He assured me, and if they ran his credit now, it might look messy. He asked if I could put the lease in my name, just for the first year, just until his portfolio stabilized. He promised he would transfer his half of the rent to me on the first of every month. He looked me in the eyes and told me he hated asking, that it killed his pride, but he needed me to be his partner in this. I signed the lease. I felt like a hero. I was supporting my brilliant, temporarily unlucky fiancé. The first month, he paid his share. The second month, he paid half, citing a delay with a check. By the third month, the excuses became as routine as the morning coffee. "The wire is pending," he would say. "The client is on vacation," he would claim. "Why are you hounding me about money?" he would eventually snap, turning the tables. "Do you not trust my potential? I am on the verge of closing a deal worth $50,000. You are focusing on pennies while I am trying to build millions." That was his masterpiece maneuver. He weaponized my own ambition against me. If I asked about the rent, I was being small-minded. If I asked why he was playing golf on a Tuesday while I was drowning in spreadsheets, he told me he was networking on the green. I started to feel a cognitive dissonance, a buzzing in my brain that I pushed down with more work. I noticed that my successes were always met with a lukewarm, "That is nice, babe," while his failures were treated as tragic injustices that required my comfort and my wallet. If I landed a $10,000 contract, he would remind me that taxes would take 30%. But if he lost a client, it was because the market was volatile and he was a victim of circumstances. The final lock on the cage came on the night of our engagement. It was 6 months ago. I had just closed the deal with the sprawling hotel chain downtown, a contract that would secure my studio's overhead for 2 years. I came home buzzing with adrenaline, a bottle of champagne in my hand, ready to celebrate my win. Grant was there, dressed in his best suit, the apartment filled with candles I had bought, lit with a lighter I had paid for. Before I could even pour a glass or tell him about the negotiation I had crushed, he dropped to one knee. He pulled out a ring box. "Tessa," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you are the only one who sees me. You are the only one who believes in the vision. Let us build this empire together." I said yes. I cried. I let him slip the ring onto my finger. But looking back now, I see the timing for what it was. He did not propose because he was overcome with love. He proposed because he saw me winning. He saw my stock rising, and he wanted to acquire the asset before it realized its own value. He saw that I had just secured financial stability, and he wanted to attach himself to that revenue stream permanently. The ring was not a promise. It was a branding iron. He turned my moment of professional triumph into a supporting scene for his romantic narrative. We never drank the champagne to celebrate my contract. We drank it to celebrate us. For the last 6 months, I have walked around believing that we were a team. I thought marriage meant 2 people carrying the load together. I thought we were building a life, brick by brick. But as I stood in the cold wind tonight, replaying the last 3 years in my head, the truth finally settled in. I was not building a life with Grant. I was building a platform, a sturdy, expensive, comfortable platform constructed from my credit score, my savings, and my exhaustion. And he? He was just the man standing on top of it, waiting for the crowd to applaud his height. completely forgetting that without me, he would be standing in the dirt. But he had made a fatal error. He thought the platform was inanimate. He thought the foundation would just sit there and take the weight forever. He forgot that I was the architect, and an architect knows exactly where the load-bearing beams are. And an architect knows exactly how to pull them out. If you were to look at the paperwork of my life from the outside, you would assume I was a very successful, single woman who had taken on an adult dependent. That is what the tax forms, the bank statements, and the lease agreement said. But for the longest time, I refused to read the story the numbers were telling me. I was too busy reading the romance novel Grant was writing in my head. However, once the blinders began to slip, the reality of our financial architecture became impossible to ignore. It started with the apartment. We lived in a stunning loft in the West Loop, a place with exposed brick and views that made you feel like you owned the city. When we moved in, Grant had been very specific about the aesthetic. He needed a place that screamed success because, in his line of work, perception was reality. But when the lease arrived, he had been suspiciously busy. He claimed his previous address was still tied up in a dispute with a landlord who was trying to extort him, and he did not want to complicate our application with a background check that might raise flags. So, I signed for the $4,200 a month rent. I signed for the security deposit, which was another $4,000. I signed for the renter's insurance. Grant promised to set up a recurring transfer for his half. I checked my bank statements 3 months ago. In the 2 years we had lived there, Grant had transferred his full share of the rent exactly twice. The other 22 months were a patchwork of excuses. He would send $500 here, $1,000 there, always accompanied by a text saying a client was late on payment or a check was clearing on Friday. Friday would come and go, and the balance would never arrive. I stopped asking because every time I did, he would sigh deeply and ask if I was really going to nickel and dime him when he was on the verge of a breakthrough. Then there was the car. The obsidian black Land Rover Velar sitting in our garage was a beautiful machine. Grant drove it everywhere. He picked up clients in it. He drove it to his gym. He posted photos of the steering wheel on his Instagram story, with captions like grind mode and office on wheels. But the loan was in my name. He had convinced me that his credit utilization ratio was too high because he was leveraging debt to build his business infrastructure. He said that if I took the loan, he would make the payments, and it would actually help my credit score. It sounded logical at the time. The reality was that the $780 monthly payment came out of my personal checking account on the 15th of every month. Grant had paid for the gas. Sometimes. The more I looked, the more I saw the pattern. It was not just the big-ticket items, it was the lifestyle. Grant cultivated an image of a high-flying consultant who enjoyed the finer things. He had a membership at the most exclusive gym in the city, the kind that costs $250 a month and offers eucalyptus towels. That was on my American Express. He wore suits that cost $1,200 each. He said he needed them to look the part. I paid for the tailoring. He drank single malt scotch that cost $90 a bottle. I bought it at the liquor store on my way home from work because he texted me saying he had had a hard day. I began to realize that his entire public persona was a costume that I had purchased. His friends, the group of guys who laughed at me at the restaurant, were part of this illusion. We went out to dinner with them frequently. At first, I thought they were just a fun, boisterous group, but then I noticed the ritual. We would go to a steakhouse or a sushi place where the menu did not have prices listed. We would order rounds of drinks, appetizers, the works. When the check arrived, a strange paralysis would overtake the table. Grant would suddenly need to use the restroom. Marcus would be engrossed in a text message. Julian would start telling a long, involved story that required aggressive hand gestures, making it impossible for him to reach for his wallet. The waiter would stand there, hovering. The silence would stretch, becoming awkward. And because I was raised to be polite, and because I was the one who actually had money in the bank, I would reach out and take the leather folder. "You are so generous, Tessa," Julian would say, finally looking up from the table. "Yeah, Tess, you are the best," Grant would add, sliding back into his seat just as I was signing the receipt. We will get the next one. They never got the next one. The total for those dinners usually ran between $400 and $600. Over the last year, I calculated that I had spent nearly $8,000 feeding and watering Grant's friends. They called me generous to my face, but I now realize that generous was just their code word for sucker. The most dangerous part of this dynamic was not just the money, it was the psychological defense system Grant had built around it. Whenever I tried to bring up his work, the conversation would turn volatile. I would ask a simple question, like asking who his current clients were, or how the quarterly projections looked. I asked because I was interested, but also because I was the one funding the operation. His reaction was always defensive. "Why are you grilling me?" he would ask, his voice tight. "Do you not trust me? You sound like a compliance officer, not a fiancé. You have to understand that consulting is a relationship business. Tessa, it is not like your little party planning gig where you just sell balloons. I am building long-term equity." He belittled my work, my little party planning gig that generated $300,000 in revenue last year, while elevating his own vague activities to the level of high art. So, I started doing my own audit. It was a Tuesday afternoon, about 3 weeks before the wedding, when the suspicion turned into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. Grant told me he had an all-day strategy session with a potential investor at a club in the suburbs. He said he would be unreachable from 9 in the morning until 5 in the afternoon. I was working from home that day. I opened the credit card statement for the card he carried, the one that was technically mine, but had his name on the plastic. At 10:30 in the morning, there was a charge for $45 at a gas station near the pristine golf courses of Oak Brook. At 12:15 in the afternoon, there was a charge for $82 at the clubhouse grill of that same golf course. At 4 o'clock, there was a charge for $120 at the clubhouse bar. There was no strategy session. There was no investor. There was just Grant, playing 18 holes on a Tuesday, drinking beer and eating club sandwiches on my dime while I was negotiating floral contracts. When he came home that night, he looked exhausted. He loosened his tie and slumped onto the couch. "Brutal day," he said, rubbing his temples. "The guy is interested, but he is a tough negotiator. I had to really grind to get him to see the value proposition. I am drained." I looked at him. I looked at the grass stain on the hem of his trousers that he had missed. I looked at the slight sunburn on his nose. "Did you eat?" I asked, testing him. "No, I was too busy talking," he lied. "I am starving." I ordered him a pizza. I watched him eat it, and for the first time, I did not see a hardworking entrepreneur. I saw a con artist. But the final straw, the moment that turned my sadness into a weapon, happened a week later. I had come home early from the studio. My head was pounding, and I wanted to take a nap before tackling the seating charts. The apartment was quiet, so I assumed Grant was out. I kicked off my shoes and walked toward the bedroom in my socks. That was when I heard his voice coming from the balcony. The door was cracked open to let in the breeze. He was on the phone, his voice low and confident, the tone he used when he was trying to impress someone. I stopped in the hallway, pressing myself against the wall. "No, listen, the capital is not an issue," Grant was saying. "I have a silent backer who covers the operational costs. Yeah, completely silent. She does not get involved in the strategy. She just handles the overhead." He paused, listening to the person on the other line. Then he laughed, a dry, dismissive sound. "Yeah, well, you know how it is. You find a sponsor who likes the idea of being with a guy who is going places, and you let them invest. It is a trade-off. She gets the ring and the status, and I get the runway to do my thing. It is a business arrangement, really. She just thinks it is a fairy tale." My blood ran cold. He did not call me his fiancé. He did not call me his partner. He called me his sponsor. He called me his silent backer. He had reduced our entire relationship, our love, our future, down to a venture capital pitch. I was not a person to him. I was an angel investor who slept in his bed. I did not storm out onto the balcony. I did not scream. I backed away slowly, retreating to the bathroom. I locked the door and sat on the edge of the tub, staring at the tiles. The tears that came were short and angry. I wiped them away quickly. Crying would not get my money back. Crying would not unsign the lease. I needed a plan. The next morning, I told Grant I had a vendor meeting in the financial district. I put on my best blazer and walked into a competitor bank, one where I had no previous accounts, one that Grant knew nothing about. I sat down with a personal banker named Sarah. I need to open a new checking and savings account, I told her. And I need to make sure that no mail ever goes to my home address. Everything must be digital, and I need a safety deposit box. We can certainly do that, Sarah said, typing away. Are you transferring funds today? Yes, I said. I am moving my personal savings, and I need to change the direct deposit for my business income effective immediately. It took an hour. When I walked out of the bank, I had a new debit card hidden in the lining of my purse. I had a new account number that Grant Holloway would never see. It was a small step. It was not a confrontation. But as I stood on the sidewalk, watching the city traffic rush by, I felt the first flicker of control returning. He thought I was his sponsor. He thought I was a silent checkbook. He was about to find out that when a sponsor pulls their funding, the project collapses. I went back to the office and opened a new spreadsheet. I named it Project Liquidation. I started cataloging everything, every receipt, every lie, every time he went golfing while claiming to be working. I was not just building a case for a breakup. I was building a case for a complete and total audit of his life. If he wanted to treat our relationship like a business arrangement, fine. I would show him exactly what happens when you commit fraud against the majority shareholder. I went home that night and cooked dinner. I asked him how his day was. I smiled when he told me about another promising lead. That sounds amazing, honey, I said, pouring him a glass of wine. I can't wait to see it pay off. I watched him drink the wine I paid for. Sitting on the sofa I paid for. In the apartment I paid for. Enjoy it, Grant. I thought, enjoy the luxury while it lasts, because the eviction notice is being drafted, and you do not even know it. 6 weeks before the wedding, the air in our apartment changed. It was no longer just the tension of two people sharing a space. It was the calculated, suffocating atmosphere of a chess match where one player believes the other does not know the rules. Grant began a campaign of strategic coldness. It was not overt abuse, nothing I could point to and scream about. It was a slow, dripping faucet of indifference designed to make me question my own sanity. He would come home and walk right past me as if I were a piece of furniture. If I asked a question, he would wait 5 seconds too long to answer, staring at his phone, making it clear that my existence was an interruption to his digital life. One evening, while I was reviewing the catering budget on the kitchen island, Grant leaned against the fridge, nursing a beer I had bought. He watched me with a look of mock concern that made my skin crawl. "You look wrecked, Tessa," he said, shaking his head. "I was talking to the guys, and we think you are taking on too much. Maybe you should drop that merger project with the tech firm. You know, focus on being a bride. Focus on us." I paused, my pen hovering over the spreadsheet. I knew exactly what he was doing. That merger project was projected to bring in $40,000 in pure profit for Northwind Social. If I dropped it, I would lose my financial cushion. I would be vulnerable, and a vulnerable woman is much harder to leave, or much easier to control, depending on which way the wind was blowing in his narcissistic mind. "I can handle it," I said, keeping my voice even. "The contract is signed. I do not break contracts." "See, that is your problem," he scoffed, pushing off the fridge. "You are so rigid. You are obsessed with money and obligations. You do not know how to just flow. It is unattractive. Tessa, it makes you look desperate." He walked away, leaving the insult hanging in the air like stale smoke. He wanted me to feel small. He wanted me to feel like a burden so that when he eventually cut me loose, I would think I deserved it. 2 days later, the plan to humiliate me began to take a concrete shape, though I did not see the full picture yet. We were meeting with the wedding coordinator at the venue, Grant, who usually had zero interest in the logistics, suddenly had a request. "I want to do a special speech right before the vows," Grant told the coordinator, flashing his charm school smile. "Just me. I want the microphone for about 5 minutes. I have prepared something. Distinct, a reflection on our journey." The coordinator swooned. "Oh, that is so romantic. Grant, most grooms just want to get to the party." I sat there, freezing. My intuition was screaming. Grant did not do romantic reflections. Grant did speeches when he wanted to sell something or when he wanted to crush someone. I looked at him, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of anticipation in his eyes. It was the look a predator gets when the trap is set. "Are you sure?" I asked, playing the role of the nervous bride. "We have a tight schedule." "Trust me, babe," he said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. His palm was cold. "It will be unforgettable. Everyone will be talking about it." I bet they would. The confirmation that I was walking into an execution came from the most unlikely source, a bridesmaid fitting. I was in the dressing room of a boutique on Oak Street with 3 of my bridesmaids. One of them was Chloe, a sweet but somewhat loose-lipped girl who had recently started dating one of Grant's gym buddies. The champagne had been flowing freely, and Chloe was giggling as she struggled with a zipper. "God, Grant's friends are so bad," she slurred slightly, leaning against the mirror. "They were joking the other night at the bar. It was so mean, but kind of funny in a dark way." I stopped pinning the hem of her dress. "What were they joking about?" "Oh, just, like, the wedding," Chloe said, waving her hand dismissively. "They have this betting pool going, like $500 a head." My stomach dropped. "A betting pool on what?" "On, you know," she giggled, oblivious to the silence descending on the room. "On whether the wedding actually happens, and if it does not, they are betting on how hard you will cry. Someone said you would faint. Grant just laughed and said he would put money on ugly crying." Chloe covered her mouth, realizing too late what she had said. "Oh my God, I am kidding. They were just drunk. You know how guys are." I stood up slowly. The pins in my hand felt like little daggers. "Right," I said, forcing a smile that felt like it was carved out of marble. "Just guys being guys." I did not faint. I did not cry. I finished the fitting. I paid the deposit for the dresses, and then I went to my car and made the call that would seal Grant's fate. "Elena," I said when my lawyer picked up, "I need an urgent appointment, tomorrow morning, and I need you to bring the intellectual property specialist." The meeting with Elena Vance was clinical and surgical. I sat in her office, surrounded by leather-bound books, and laid out the autopsy of my relationship. "I need to protect everything," I said. "The apartment is in my name, but he has established residency. The car is in my name, but he has the keys. The accounts are mine, but he is an authorized user." Elena took notes, her face grim. "We need to prepare a shock and awe termination," she advised. "We draft a formal notice of trespass for the apartment. We prepare a revocation of power of attorney. We draft letters to the credit card companies to remove him as a user. Time to go out exactly when you give the signal. But Tessa, you cannot tell him. If he knows you are planning this, he could drain the accounts or damage the property before you can lock him out." "He will not know," I promised. "But there is one more thing. I need to register a trademark." I slid a folder across the desk. Inside were the receipts for the website design, the domain hosting, and the logo creation for Holloway Advisory. "Grant has been operating under this name for 2 years, I explained. "But he is cheap. He never filed the paperwork with the United States Patent and Trademark Office because he said the $600 filing fee was a scam. I paid for the creation of the brand. I have the invoices to prove I commissioned the logo." Elena raised an eyebrow, a slow smile spreading across her face. "You want to trademark his business name? Under your holding company?" "I want to own it," I said. "I want to own the name, the logo, and the digital footprint, so that when this is over, he cannot even print a business card without my permission." We filed the paperwork that afternoon because Grant had never bothered to incorporate properly. The name was available. I signed the check, legally. Holloway Advisory was now a subsidiary of Northwind Social. The final piece of my preparation involved the wedding vendors. I spent the next week making phone calls from my office, far away from Grant's listening ears. I called the venue manager, the florist, and the caterer. "I am just doing a final review of the contracts," I told them, my voice breezy and professional. "I noticed the cancellation clause requires written notice from the signatory party. That is me, correct?" "Yes, Ms. Langford," they confirmed. "Only you can make changes or cancel. And if someone else calls, say the groom?" "We would not be able to process any changes without your approval, as you are the sole financial guarantor." "Perfect," I said. "Please add a note to the file. No changes are to be made unless they come from this phone number or my verified email. Password protect the account." I hung up the phone and stared out the window at the Chicago skyline. Grant was out there somewhere, probably laughing with his friends about the pathetic woman waiting at home, placing bets on my humiliation. He thought he was writing the script for a tragedy where I was the victim. He had no idea that I had just bought the production studio. I went home that night and found Grant packing a bag. "Bachelor weekend," he said, not even looking at me. "Going to Vegas with the boys. Do not wait up." He kissed me on the cheek, a dry, obligatory peck. "Try not to stress about the wedding. Tessa, whatever happens, happens." He walked out the door, whistling. I locked the deadbolt behind him. I went to the safe in the closet, the one he thought only contained my grandmother's jewelry. I opened it and placed the fresh file from Elena inside. It sat next to the list of account numbers and the trademark application. "Have fun, Grant," I whispered to the empty apartment. "Spend my money while you can, because the bill is coming due, and the interest rate is going to be fatal." He thought I was the one being led to the slaughter, but I had already sharpened the knife, and I had started holding the leash. Harborlight Hall was a masterpiece of architectural intimidation. The vaulted ceiling soared 50 feet above us, and the walls were lined with floor-to-ceiling glass that looked out over the marina. The late afternoon sun hit the water, creating a blinding golden backdrop that I had personally curated to ensure the lighting for the photographs was perfect. I stood at the top of the grand staircase. My dress, a custom silk design that cost $6,000, felt heavy, but not as heavy as the dread in my stomach. Or perhaps it was not dread. Perhaps it was the cold, heavy weight of ammunition. 300 guests were seated below. I saw the familiar faces of my family, Grant's family, our college friends, and a significant number of his business associates, whom I had never met but whose plates of filet mignon I was paying for. To the left of the altar, a professional videography team was live-streaming the event. Grant had insisted on the live stream. He said he wanted his extended network in Europe and Asia to witness our union. I walked down the aisle. The string quartet played a hauntingly beautiful version of a song we had chosen together. Every step on the white runner felt like a countdown. When I reached the altar, Grant was waiting. He looked devastatingly handsome in the tuxedo I had purchased. His hair was perfect. He smiled at me, a wide, dazzling smile that did not reach his eyes. It was the smile of a man who had just placed a winning bet. I handed my bouquet to my maid of honor, Sarah, whose hands were trembling slightly. I turned to face Grant. The officiant, a kind elderly man we had hired, opened his book. "Dearly beloved," he began, "we are gathered here today." "Actually," Grant said, his voice booming. He did not whisper. He did not signal for a pause. He simply took the microphone from the stand, cutting off the officiant mid-sentence. The feedback whined for a split second, a sharp screech that made the front row wince. "Hold on a second, Reverend," Grant said, stepping back from me. He turned to face the crowd, the microphone gripped loosely in his hand like a lounge singer. He looked relaxed, too relaxed. The room went dead silent. The string quartet stopped playing. A few people chuckled nervously, assuming this was part of the special speech Grant had hinted at. I have been thinking a lot about this moment, Grant said, pacing slightly. He looked at the camera, then at his friends in the front row, the ones who had placed the bets. I have been thinking about what marriage means. It is about partnership. It is about equals. It is about two people running at the same speed. He turned to look at me. His expression shifted. The charm evaporated, replaced by a look of profound, theatrical pity. And I just cannot do it, he said. A gasp rippled through the room. It sounded like the air being sucked out of an airlock. I cannot stand here and lie to God and all of you, Grant continued, his voice gaining strength. I cannot marry Tessa because, honestly, it would not be fair to me, and it would not be fair to her to let her keep pretending she's on my level. My mother stood up in the third row, her hand flying to her mouth. My father looked ready to charge the altar, but I caught his eye. I gave a microscopic shake of my head. Wait. Grant laughed, a short, sharp sound. Look at her. She is standing there in that dress, trying so hard. That is the thing about Tessa. She tries so hard. But you cannot buy class, and you cannot fake substance. I need a woman who challenges me, not a woman who is just pathetic. The word hung in the air, pathetic. Is this a joke? Someone whispered loudly from the back. It is not a joke, Grant answered, addressing the guest directly. It is a rescue mission. I am rescuing myself. You guys know me. You know I am building a legacy. I am building an empire. And Tessa? What does she do? She hangs balloons. She plans parties. She is basically a glorified decorator. She thinks because she has a little bit of luck with her little business that she can buy a seat at the grown-up table. But she is just a checkbook with a heartbeat. He walked closer to me, invading my personal space. The camera followed him. He was playing to the lens. She thought she could trap me, he said, lowering his voice to a mock whisper that the microphone amplified to the rafters. She thought if she paid for the apartment, and the car, and the suits, that I would overlook the fact that she is boring, that she is small. She thought she could buy a husband because she knew she could not keep one with her personality. He turned back to the crowd, spreading his arms wide, acting the part of the martyr. I am sorry to ruin the afternoon, he said, sounding anything but sorry. But I had to be brave enough to say it. I had to be the one to stop this charade. She would have let this go on forever, dragging me down, suffocating me with her mediocrity. So, yeah, the wedding is off, because I deserve better. And frankly, looking at her right now, standing there like a statue, I think we can all see I made the right call. He looked at his groomsmen. Julian was smirking, looking down at his lap to hide his laughter. Marcus was openly grinning. They were tallying their winnings. I looked at Grant's mother. She had started to stand up when he first started speaking, shock written on her face. But now, she was being pulled back down by her sister. She looked at me, then looked away. She did not say a word. She did not stop him. She chose her son, even in his cruelty. I looked at the guests. I saw clients I had worked with for years. I saw friends I had supported through divorces. I saw people whose businesses I had promoted for free. They were looking at their shoes. They were looking at their phones. They were avoiding my eyes. The silence was absolute. It was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest. Grant stood there, panting slightly from the exertion of his performance, waiting. He was waiting for the tears. He was waiting for me to collapse. He was waiting for the ugly cry that would win his friends their $500. He expected me to run down the aisle, sobbing, humiliated, destroyed. He expected me to flee the building so he could stay and drink the bar dry, spinning the narrative of how he had narrowly escaped a controlling, desperate woman. He wanted a victim. I looked at him. I really looked at him. I saw the sweat on his upper lip. I saw the slight tremor in his hand holding the microphone. I saw the desperation of a man who has to tear someone else down to feel tall. And suddenly, the hurt vanished. It was replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. This was not a tragedy. This was evidence. He had just confessed to everything, on camera. In front of 300 witnesses, he had admitted that I paid for everything. He had admitted that he viewed our relationship as a transaction he was too good for. He had given me the moral high ground, and he had signed the deed over to me in blood. I felt the corners of my mouth twitch. I smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a predator who realizes the prey has just walked into the cage and locked the door from the inside. I did not cry. I did not shake. I did not run. I took one step forward. The silk of my dress rustled softly in the silence. I reached out my hand toward him. "Grant," I said, my voice steady, loud enough to be heard even without amplification. He looked surprised. He blinked, confused by my lack of hysteria. "May I asked, gesturing to the microphone in his hand. He hesitated. For a second, fear flickered in his eyes. He had expected a breakdown, not a rebuttal, but he was too arrogant to refuse. He thought I was going to beg. He thought I was going to plead with him to take me back. He smirked and handed me the microphone. "Go ahead," he said, stepping back, crossing his arms. "Tell them how sorry you are." I took the microphone. It was warm from his grip. I turned to face the crowd. I looked directly into the camera lens of the live stream. Then I looked back at Grant. "Thank you," I said, my voice ringing out clear and sharp as a bell. "Thank you for saying that. You have saved me the trouble of having to explain why I am about to do what comes next." The room held its breath. The air crackled. I tightened my grip on the microphone. It was time to liquidate the asset. "Thank you, Grant," I said. My voice did not shake. It did not waver. It was the voice I used during high-stakes contract negotiations, the one that made vendors sit up straight and double-check their math. "Thank you for choosing to do this in front of witnesses. It makes the legal proceedings so much easier." The smirk on Grant's face faltered for a fraction of a second. He had expected begging. He had expected a plea for a second chance. He had not expected gratitude. I slowly raised my left hand. With deliberate, agonizing slowness, I slid the diamond engagement ring off my finger. It felt like removing a tourniquet. The blood rushed back into my hand, warm and alive. A waiter was standing frozen near the front row, holding a tray of champagne glasses that were meant for the toast. I walked over to him. The crowd watched my every move. I placed the ring on the silver tray next to a crystal flute. Clink! The sound was small, but in the dead silence of the hall, it sounded like a hammer hitting an anvil. "That is the first asset returned," I said, turning back to Grant. "Now, let us address the rest of the portfolio." Grant took a step forward, his brow furrowing. "Tessa, stop it. You are embarrassing yourself." "Am I?" I asked. I looked out at the sea of faces, his friends, his family, my clients. "You just spent 10 minutes telling everyone that I am nothing but a source of funding. You called me a checkbook with a heartbeat. You are absolutely right, Grant. I am the checkbook. But the thing about checkbooks is that the owner can close them whenever she wants." I pulled a small, folded piece of paper from the pocket of my dress. It was my cheat sheet, though I did not need it. I had memorized every line item. "Fact number 1, I announced, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. "The apartment at 122 West Washington. You told your friends it was your bachelor pad. The lease is in my name, solely. You are listed as an occupant, not a tenant, which means that as of this moment, your permission to reside there is revoked. You have 24 hours to remove your personal effects before I change the locks." Grant's face went pale. "You cannot do that. That is my home." "It is my property," I corrected him. "Fact number 2, the black Land Rover Velar parked in the valet lot. The one with the license plate grind set that you ordered. The financing is in my name. The insurance is in my name. I have already contacted the dealership. If the keys are not returned to my attorney by noon tomorrow, the vehicle will be reported as stolen." A murmur went through the crowd. This was not a breakup. It was a foreclosure. "And fact number 3, I continued, relentless. The American Express Platinum card in your pocket, the one you used to buy the tuxedo you are wearing right now. The one you used to pay for the bachelor trip to Vegas last weekend. It is a supplementary card on my account. My assistant called the fraud department 10 minutes ago. It has been deactivated." Grant reached into his pocket instinctively, his hand trembling. He pulled out the card, staring at it as if it had suddenly turned into a piece of useless plastic, which it had. "You said I was pathetic," I said, walking slowly toward him. "You said I was trying to buy you, but you never stopped to think about what happens when the buyer realizes the merchandise is defective." The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Grant looked around wildly, seeking an ally. He looked at his mother. She was staring at her lap, picking at a loose thread on her dress. He looked at his groomsmen. Julian and Marcus were no longer laughing. They were looking at me with a mixture of fear and awe. "This is crazy," Grant stammered, his voice losing its theatrical boom. He looked at the camera, then back at me. "You are crazy. This is exactly what I meant. You are controlling." "I am compliant," I said. "I am following the terms of the contract you just canceled publicly." I turned my head slightly to the side of the stage. "Mr. Henderson, could you please step out here for a moment?" The venue manager, a tall man in a sharp suit, walked out from the wings. He looked uncomfortable but professional. I had briefed him on the possibility of a disturbance earlier that week, though he had not known the specifics. "Mr. Henderson," I said into the microphone, "for the record, and for the benefit of the 300 guests here, who signed the contract for this venue rental?" "Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. "You did, Ms. Langford." "And who paid the $25,000 deposit?" "You did, Ms. Langford." "And who is the only person authorized to terminate the event or authorize security protocols?" "That would be you, Ms. Langford." I nodded. "Thank you." I turned back to Grant. He looked small now. The stage that he thought was his pedestal had turned into an island, and the tide was rising fast. "You see, Grant," I said, my voice dropping to a conversational, almost intimate tone, "you wanted to end this publicly to humiliate me. You wanted to break my spirit so I would run away and leave you with the toys I bought. But I do not run. If you want to end it publicly to shame me, then I will end it publicly to free myself." Grant's face twisted into an ugly mask of rage. The charm was gone. The mask had slipped completely. "Give me that microphone," he snarled. He lunged toward me, his hand outstretched, fingers hooked like claws. He never reached me. Two men in dark suits, who had been standing discreetly by the exit signs, moved with terrifying speed. They were on the stage in 2 seconds. One of them stepped between me and Grant, his chest acting as a human wall. The other one took Grant by the arm, not aggressively, but with a firmness that allowed no argument. "Sir, please step back," the security guard said. "Get off me," Grant shouted, trying to shake him off. "She is lying. She is manipulating you." "We work for Ms. Langford, sir," the guard said calmly, "and she has indicated that your presence is no longer required." Grant looked at the guards, then at me. He looked at the camera, which was still rolling, capturing every second of his unraveling. He realized, finally, that he had lost. He had bet everything on my weakness, and he had gone bust against my strength. I turned away from him. He was no longer my concern. He was just a line item I had crossed out. I addressed the guests one last time. I saw the shock on their faces, but I also saw something else in the eyes of the women. Respect. "I apologize for the interruption to your afternoon," I said. "I know many of you traveled far to be here. Please, do not let this food go to waste. The catering is paid for, the open bar is paid for, the band is paid for. Stay, eat, drink, celebrate the fact that I just dodged a bullet." I paused, letting my gaze drift over to where Grant was being held back by security. "Enjoy the party," I said. "I am paying for it, but from this second forward, I am not paying for him anymore." I handed the microphone to Mr. Henderson. I did not look back at Grant. I did not look back at his mother. I walked down the stairs of the stage. My head was high. My breathing was even. The aisle felt different this time. When I walked in, it had been a path to a prison. Now, it was a runway to freedom. The silence held for another moment, and then, from somewhere in the back, a single person started clapping, then another. It was not a thunderous applause, but a ripple of acknowledgement. I walked past the pews. I walked past the floral arrangements I had chosen. I walked through the heavy oak doors and out into the lobby. Behind me, I heard Grant shouting something, but his voice was drowned out by the sound of the string quartet starting to play again, a lively, upbeat waltz that I had originally picked for the cocktail hour. I pushed open the front doors of Harborlight Hall. The cool evening air hit my face. It smelled of the lake and rain. It smelled like the future. I walked to the valet stand. The attendant looked at me with wide eyes. He had likely heard the commotion. "My car, please," I said. "The white sedan, not the Rover." "Yes, Ms. Langford," he stammered. I stood there, alone on the curb. I checked my phone. I had 3 notifications from my bank confirming the freezing of the assets. I had 1 text from Elena, my lawyer. "It is done. The papers are being couriered to him now." I took a deep breath. My chest felt lighter than it had in 3 years. I had walked into that hall a victim in a white dress. I was walking out a CEO who had just completed the most important hostile takeover of her career. And Grant? He was still inside, standing on a stage he did not own, wearing a suit he did not pay for, surrounded by people who now knew exactly what he was worth. 0. The 72 hours following the wedding that never happened were not filled with weeping or ice cream binges. They were defined by the relentless, satisfying hum of bureaucracy doing exactly what it was designed to do. While I sat in my temporary suite at a downtown hotel, I had decided to stay away from the apartment for a few days to avoid any physical drama. My phone vibrated across the coffee table like a trapped insect. It started 10 minutes after I drove away from the venue and did not stop. Grant's strategy shifted with the manic speed of a day trader watching a market crash. First came the denial and the gaslighting. "Baby, please pick up. It was a joke. A bad joke. I just got cold feet and panicked. You know how I get with crowds." Then came the anger. "You humiliated me. You ruined my reputation. You need to fix this. Call my mother and apologize." Then, by midnight, it had devolved into desperate, rambling essays that read like a bad freshman philosophy paper. "I am scared of the intensity of our love. Tessa, I tried to push you away because I felt unworthy, and I self-sabotaged. The things I said about you being pathetic were actually me projecting my own insecurities. Please, let us talk. I love you." I did not reply to a single message. Instead, I poured myself a glass of sparkling water and opened my laptop. I had a different kind of correspondence to attend to. My first call the next morning was to the bank. It was 9 o'clock on a Monday. "Good morning. This is the Fraud Prevention Department," the agent said. "Good morning," I replied, my voice crisp. "My name is Tessa Langford. I need to confirm the status of the supplementary card issued to Grant Holloway ending in 4599. That card has been deactivated as per your request yesterday. Ms. Langford." "Excellent," I said. "I also need to place a strict verbal password on the account. I believe Mr. Holloway may attempt to access the funds by claiming he lost his card, or that there was a system error." "Understood. We can set that up. What is the current balance on the supplementary card?" "He ran up about $4,000 in the last week," I noted, looking at the statement. "Please authorize the minimum payment from my primary account to avoid interest, but freeze all new purchasing ability." Done. Next was the car dealership. The lease agreement for the Land Rover Velar was entirely in my name, a fact Grant had conveniently ignored when he was driving it to impress his clients. "Hi, this is the leasing office," the manager answered. "This is Tessa Langford. I am calling to arrange a voluntary surrender of the vehicle," I said. "The primary driver is no longer authorized to operate it. I have the spare key, but the primary key is in his possession. I would like to authorize a retrieval service." "We can send a tow team to the registered address," the manager said. "If the vehicle is parked on a public street or in a driveway, We can pick it up today. It is parked in the valet garage at 122 West Washington, I said. I will notify the garage attendants to release it to your team. I felt a dark, cold satisfaction as I hung up. Grant loved that car. He had named it. He treated it better than he treated me. And by this afternoon, it would be sitting in a dealership lot, scrubbed clean of his presence. By Tuesday afternoon, the reality of his homelessness began to set in. I received a call from the concierge at my apartment building. I had lived there for 3 years and tipped the staff heavily every Christmas. They knew who paid the rent. Ms. Langford? The concierge, Mr. O'Malley, whispered. Mr. Holloway is in the lobby. He is trying to get into the elevator, but his fob is not working. He is making quite a scene. He says his key is demagnetized. It is not demagnetized, Mr. O'Malley, I said calmly. I deactivated it through the tenant portal yesterday morning. Mr. Holloway is no longer a resident. If he attempts to go up to the unit, please inform him that he is trespassing. I understand, Mr. O'Malley said. He is shouting that his suits are up there. You can tell him that I have arranged for a courier to deliver 2 boxes of his personal effects to his mother's address in Naperville tomorrow. Everything he owns is in those boxes. If he continues to shout, please feel free to call the police. I could hear the muffled sound of Grant's voice in the background, high-pitched and frantic. Before Mr. O'Malley hung up, I imagined him standing in the lobby with its marble floors and Art Deco chandeliers, the lobby he used to strut through like he owned the building, now barred from entry like a solicitor. Later that day, the flying monkeys arrived. This is a term I learned from my therapist. The people a narcissist sends to do their bidding when they can no longer reach you directly. I was leaving my lawyer's office when Julian, Grant's best friend, coincidentally bumped into me at the coffee shop in the lobby. He looked tired and uncomfortable. Tessa, he said, putting on a sympathetic face that looked entirely unnatural on him. Hey, I did not expect to see you here. I am sure you didn't, Julian, I said, not breaking stride. He hurried to keep up with me. Look, can we just talk for a second? Grant is a mess. I mean, he is really in a bad place. He is sleeping on my couch. He is crying nonstop. That sounds like a problem for his therapist, not me, I said, stopping to check my phone. Come on, Tessa, you guys were perfect together. He just snapped under the pressure. The wedding industry is crazy, right? He wants to fix it. He wants to come home. I looked at Julian. I looked at his expensive watch, which I knew he bought with a bonus from a job Grant had helped him get, using my contacts. He does not have a home with me anymore. Julian. Julian shifted his weight. He looked around nervously. Right. I get that you are mad, but look, there is also the practical stuff. Grant mentioned that you guys had already paid for the honeymoon to the Maldives, the $10,000 package. I stared at him. He was wondering, Julian continued, his voice dropping. Since you are obviously not going, maybe you could transfer the itinerary to his name? He thinks maybe a few days away would help him get his head straight so he can come back and fight for you. It seems like a waste to let the money burn, right? I actually laughed. It was a sharp barking sound that made a woman at the next table look up. Let me get this straight, I said, stepping closer to him. He humiliated me in front of 300 people, called me pathetic, canceled the wedding, and now he wants me to gift him a $10,000 vacation so he can recover from the trauma of traumatizing me? Well, when you say it like that, Julian trailed off. Tell him the trip was canceled yesterday, I said. I took the 70% refund. The remaining 30% penalty was a small price to pay to ensure he never sees a white sand beach on my dime again. I walked away, leaving Julian standing there with his mouth open. They did not care about my heart. They did not care about the humiliation. They just mourned the loss of the ATM. By Wednesday, Grant realized that the remorseful ex angle was not working, so he pivoted to the victim of abuse narrative. My Google alerts pinged in the afternoon. Grant had posted a long black and white photo of himself looking out a window on Instagram and LinkedIn. The caption was a masterpiece of fiction. Sometimes, walking away is the bravest thing you can do. I spent 3 years in a relationship where I was financially controlled and emotionally manipulated. My partner used money as a weapon to silence me. Ending the wedding was not an act of cruelty, it was an act of survival. I am starting over with nothing but my integrity, but at least I am free. The likes were rolling in. People were commenting with praying hands emojis and messages like, "So brave," "Bro and stay strong, king." My hand hovered over the keyboard. I wanted to comment. I wanted to post the receipts. I wanted to upload the bank statements showing that his financial control looked a lot like me paying his credit card bills while he played golf. "Do not do it," I told myself aloud. "That is what he wants. He wants a fight." Instead, I forwarded the screenshot to Elena. 10 minutes later, Elena sent a cease and desist letter to Grant's email and a hard copy to Julian's apartment. It was not a defamation suit. Not yet. It was a warning regarding workplace harassment. Since Grant had technically listed himself as a consultant for my company on several documents to get tax breaks, I could legally claim his public disparagement was a violation of a non-disclosure agreement he had blindly signed 2 years ago when I added him to the company health insurance plan. The letter was simple. Cease all public mentions of Miss Langford and Northwind Social immediately, or face a lawsuit for breach of contract and damages to professional reputation. The post was deleted within an hour. But the final blow, the one that truly severed the head of the snake, happened on Wednesday evening. I was sitting in my hotel room, finally relaxing, when I remembered something. Grant's consulting business, Holloway Advisory. He relied on that website for everything. It was his portfolio, his contact method, and the only proof that he actually did anything for a living. I logged into my domain hosting account, the one I had set up and paid for because Grant had claimed the setup interface was too technical for him. There it was. https google.com search Holloway Advisory com status active auto renew on payment method Tessa Langford Visa. I clicked manage domain, I clicked cancel hosting, I clicked revoke SSL certificate, and finally, just to be thorough, I clicked redirect URL. I set the redirect destination to the Wikipedia page for narcissistic personality disorder. I saved the changes. An hour later, my phone lit up with a call from Grant, then another, then a text. "What did you do to my website? I have a client trying to view my deck right now." I blocked the number. The next morning, I saw him. It was pure chance, or perhaps divine intervention. I was in a taxi, heading to a meeting. We were stopped at a red light. I looked out the window and saw a car pulled over at a gas station. It was a compact car, a neon blue Hyundai that looked like it had been rented from the bottom tier of the fleet. It was the kind of car Grant would have made fun of a week ago. Grant was sitting in the driver's seat. The window was down. He was leaning out, arguing with the pump attendant. He was holding a card in his hand, probably a prepaid debit card, or one of the few cards he had in his own name. The attendant shook his head and handed the card back. Declined. I watched Grant slam his hand against the steering wheel. He looked disheveled. He was not wearing a suit. He was wearing a wrinkled t-shirt. Without my apartment, he looked homeless. Without my car, he looked immobile. Without my credit cards, he looked powerless. Without the website I built, he was invisible. The light turned green. My taxi pulled away. Grant sat there in his cheap rental, staring at a gas pump he could not afford to use. He had wanted to be a king. He had wanted to end our marriage to prove he was above me. But as I watched him fade into the distance, I realized he had never been a king. He was just a man who had been wearing my crown, and he was terrified now that he had to face the world with his own bare head. The weeks following the implosion of my wedding were not defined by the dramatic courtroom battles I knew were coming, but by the quiet, methodical reconstruction of a life that was finally mine. I moved out of the loft on a Tuesday. The movers I hired were efficient and silent. Unlike the chaotic energy that had filled that space for 3 years, I did not move back to the suburbs, and I did not downgrade. I signed a lease on a unit in the financial district, 40 stories up, with a view of the lake that looked nothing like the view I had shared with Grant. The first thing I did was buy a yellow velvet sofa. Grant would have hated it. He would have called it garish or unprofessional, claiming it did not fit the sterile, monochromatic aesthetic he thought successful people were supposed to have. He believed success looked like a black leather chair in a glass room. I looked at that yellow sofa and saw sunshine. I saw warmth. I saw a piece of furniture that existed simply because I liked it, not because it fit a brand strategy. Decorating that apartment was an act of exorcism. I filled the fridge with ingredients for pasta and spicy curries, foods Grant avoided because they were too heavy or messed with his macros. I canceled the subscription to the ultra-premium cable package that was only there so he could watch international golf tournaments at 3 a.m. For the first time in years, my credit card statement was boring. It was beautifully, delightfully boring. There were no surprise charges for bottle service. There were no unexplained withdrawals. The numbers stabilized, and my savings account began to grow again, not because I was earning more, but because I was no longer hemorrhaging cash to support a man-child's ego. But the biggest shift happened in my career. Without the constant emotional labor of managing Grant's moods, soothing his insecurities, and covering his tracks, I found myself with an extra 20 hours a week. I poured that energy into Northwind Social. 2 weeks after the non-wedding, the VP of marketing for the hotel chain I had been working with called me. "Tessa," she said, "we heard about what happened. I just want to say, the way you handled the logistics of the cancellation was the most professional thing I have ever seen. You recouped costs we thought were lost. That kind of crisis management is exactly what we need." She offered me a retainer position to oversee their entire Midwest events calendar. It was a contract worth $80,000 a year, on top of my existing business revenue. In the past, Grant would have talked me out of it. He would have said it was too corporate, or that it would take time away from us. He would have made me feel guilty for being busy. I signed the contract on the spot. I started relearning who I was outside of the role of financier. I started running again, not on a treadmill at an expensive gym to look good for a fiancé, but outside, on the lakefront path, feeling the wind against my skin. I reconnected with friends I had drifted away from, friends Grant had labeled boring because they wanted to grab a coffee and talk about books rather than get drunk at a VIP table. We sat in diners, we split the bill evenly, we laughed about real things. I realized I had been starving for genuine connection while drowning in artificial socialization. The wedding vendors were surprisingly supportive. I expected awkwardness, but instead, I received validation. The florist, a woman named Maria, whom I had worked with for 5 years, sent me a beautiful arrangement of white lilies with a note. "He never let you finish a sentence during the consultations." The note read, "We all saw it. We are just glad you saw it too before it was too late. You are better off." It turned out, I was not the only one who had noticed the red flags. Everyone had seen them, but the social contract of a wedding prevents people from speaking up. They had watched me pay for everything while he took the credit. They had watched him critique my choices while bringing nothing to the table. They knew. One afternoon, I was meeting with a new client, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who ran a logistics firm. We were discussing venue options when she suddenly stopped and looked at me. "You are the girl from the Harbor Light Hall incident, aren't you?" she asked. I stiffened. "I am." "My niece was a guest," she said. She leaned forward, her expression softening. "I was married to a man like that in my 20s. He had big dreams and an empty wallet, and he made me feel like I was the one holding him back because I expected him to get a job. It is a pattern, honey. They find capable women to build their stages, and then they resent the women for being the architects." That conversation changed everything for me. I had been carrying a small, heavy stone of shame in my pocket. The feeling that I had been stupid, that I had been easily tricked, but hearing her story made me realize this was not a failure of my intelligence. It was a systemic predation. Grant did not target me because I was weak. He targeted me because I was strong, and he needed that strength to feed his own weakness. Of course, Grant did not go quietly into the night. He could not access my money, and he could not access my home, so he tried to access my reputation. He began a smear campaign in the social circles we used to share. I heard the rumors. He was telling people I was bipolar. He said I had snapped and tried to control every aspect of his life. He claimed I was financially abusive because I had cut him off without notice. He told anyone who would listen that I was cruel, vindictive, and that he had ended the wedding to save himself from a life of misery. It hurt, I will not lie. It stings to know that someone you loved is painting you as a monster to the world. My instinct was to fight back. I wanted to post the bank statements online. I wanted to release the audio recordings of his voicemails where he begged for money. But I remembered the advice from my lawyer, and I remembered the look on his face when he stood alone on that stage. I chose silence. I did not post a rebuttal. I did not tweet. I did not make a my side of the story video. I let him scream into the void. And the amazing thing about the void is that eventually, it echoes back the truth. Grant's narrative began to crumble not because of what I said, but because of how I lived. I was thriving. I was closing deals. I was looking healthy and happy. Meanwhile, Grant was visibly spiraling. Without my funding, he could not maintain the facade. The wealthy consultant cannot claim to be a victim of financial abuse while simultaneously begging his friends for rent money. The vindication came in the form of a text message from Marcus. Marcus, the groomsman who had laughed the loudest when Grant called me pathetic, the one who had placed a bet on my tears. I was sitting in my office late one Friday, reviewing a contract, when my phone buzzed. Hey Tessa, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I just wanted to say sorry. For the wedding, for everything. I stared at the screen. A second message popped up. Grant tried to get me to invest in a new venture yesterday. When I asked for a business plan, he blew up at me, said I was just like you. I see it now. He is drowning and trying to pull everyone down with him. You were right to cut the rope. Hope you are doing good. I did not reply. I did not need to. But a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the heating system. It was the warmth of justice. Grant had wanted to destroy my reputation to save his own. Instead, he had exposed his true nature. People were not stupid. They saw a woman who kept her dignity and a man who lost his mind when the free ride ended. I stood up and walked to the window of my office. The city lights were twinkling below, a grid of gold and white against the darkness. 3 months ago, I was standing in a restaurant, listening to the man I loved call me pathetic. I was terrified of losing him. I was terrified of the embarrassment. Now, I was alone, and I had never felt more complete. He had tried to break me with a microphone. He had tried to define me by his rejection, but all he had done was prune the dead weight from my life so I could finally grow. I looked at the contract on my desk. It was just paper and ink, but it represented something profound. It was a promise I was making to myself. I picked up my pen. The ink flowed smoothly as I signed my name. Tessa Langford. Just Tessa. No future Mrs. Holloway attached to it. I capped the pen and took a deep breath. The revenge was not in the lawsuits, though those were going well. The revenge was not in taking back the car or the apartment. The revenge was this. It was the quiet Tuesday evening where I cooked a risotto without being told it was too carb-heavy. It was the Sunday morning run where I did not have to stop to take a photo of him for Instagram. It was the bank account that grew because I was the only one touching it. It was the peace of knowing that when I walked into a room, I was standing on my own 2 feet, not acting as a crutch for a man who would break my legs just to feel tall. Grant Holloway was a story I used to tell myself, but I had closed the book, put it on the shelf, and walked out of the library. And the fresh air outside felt exactly like victory. It had been exactly 365 days since I walked out of Harbor Light Hall. The anniversary passed without a tear or a drink. In fact, I spent the day overseeing a massive installation for a renewable energy conference at the McCormick Place Convention Center. I was too busy checking lighting rigs and approving catering menus to mourn a bullet I had successfully dodged. However, the universe has a strange way of circling back. 2 days later, the news broke in the way news always breaks in our interconnected, digitally suffocated world. Chloe, the same bridesmaid who had accidentally tipped me off about the betting pool, sent me a screenshot. It was an Instagram post. Grant was kneeling on a beach that looked suspiciously like the Florida Keys, not the Maldives, holding a ring. The caption was, "Vintage Grant." She believed in me when the world turned its back. She seized the vision. Here is to building our empire. Power couple, she said, yes. The woman in the photo looked young. She had a sweet, open face and the kind of eager smile that I used to wear. Her name, according to the tag, was Isabella. I felt a wave of nausea. It was not jealousy. It was the sickening recognition of a rerun. He was running the same script, word for word. Believed in me. The vision. Empire. It was the vocabulary of a predator looking for a host. I put my phone down, intending to ignore it. It was not my circus, and he was definitely not my monkey anymore. But the circus came to find me. A week later, I received an email on my secure work server. The subject line was simply, Grant Holloway, Financial Inquiry. It was from a man named Noah Pierce. I looked him up. He was a freelance investigative journalist with bylines in several reputable city magazines. He focused on white-collar crime and modern scams. I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop far away from my office. Noah was younger than I expected, with tired eyes and a notebook that looked like it had survived a war zone. "Ms. Langford," he said, skipping the small talk. "I am writing a piece on a specific type of financial predation. The working title is The Romance Ponzi Scheme. I have been tracking a pattern of behavior involving Grant Holloway." I stirred my black coffee. "Grant is a private citizen. I am not interested in a smear campaign." "This is not a smear campaign," Noah said. He slid a folder across the table. "This is a rescue mission. I was contacted by a friend of Isabella's. That is the new fiancé." I froze. "Isabella is 26, Noah continued. "She is a junior architect. She has a trust fund from her grandmother, not huge, but significant. Grant told her he is a high-level consultant temporarily frozen out of his assets due to a vengeful ex-wife who stole his company." "I know," Noah said, "but Isabella does not know that, or she did not, until last week. She found a credit card statement. Grant has been using her card to pay for business expenses. She traced one of the charges. It was for a rental car he claimed was a company perk. She is suspicious. Tessa. She loves him. But the math is not mathing. Her friend reached out to me to see if there was a record of him doing this before." He looked me in the eye. "You are the record, Tessa." I looked out the window. I saw the young woman in the photo again. 26, a trust fund, a career ahead of her. She was me, 3 years ago, just with a different bank account. "If I talk to you," I said, "my name stays out of it. I am a professional. I cannot have my brand associated with his drama." "We will use a pseudonym," Noah promised. "We will change the details of your job, but we need the methodology. We need to show the pattern. If it is just Isabella's word against his, he will gaslight her until she apologizes for being suspicious. But if there is a history, if there is a playbook, that is proof." I spoke for 2 hours. I told Noah everything. I told him about the temporary setbacks that lasted 3 years. I told him about the lease in my name because of his credit optimization. I told him about the dinners with friends where his wallet magically disappeared. I told him about the silent backer phone call. I gave him the numbers. The $40,000 in rent. The $8,000 in dinners. The $700 a month for the car. I gave him the anatomy of the trap. When the article went live 2 weeks later, it was viral within 4 hours. Noah had titled it, "The Wallet Wife, When Your Boyfriend is Your Biggest Expense." The story did not use Grant's name, nor did it use mine. It described a charismatic consultant in Chicago and his fiancée, Tara, but the details were so specific, so forensic in their accuracy, that anyone who knew Grant knew exactly who it was. The reaction was explosive. The comment section turned into a support group. Hundreds of women and men flooded the thread with their own stories. They described partners who used potential as a currency, who monologued about empires while forgetting their wallets, who turned financial legitimate questions into accusations of lack of trust. "I paid for his startup for 2 years," one woman wrote. "He dumped me the day he got his first seed funding." "My ex called me materialistic whenever I asked him to pay his half of the utilities," another commented. "I was working 2 jobs. He was networking at the bar." It was a movement, and Grant was the invisible face of it. Grant's reaction was predictable. He panicked. He did not know for sure it was me, but he suspected. He posted a long, rambling statement on LinkedIn, claiming he was the victim of a coordinated cyberbullying attack and that he was consulting with his legal team to sue the publication for defamation. He sent me an email, the first in a year. "I know you are behind this. You are bitter and obsessed. If you do not retract your lies, I will sue you for everything you have. I will ruin your business. I will tell everyone about your mental instability." I forwarded the email to Elena, my lawyer, with a note. "File it." We did not respond. We did not need to. The article was bulletproof because it was true, and because Noah had been careful to blur the identifiers enough to avoid a direct libel claim while keeping the behavior recognizable. Grant was flailing. He was trying to put out a forest fire with a water pistol. But the final nail in the coffin did not come from the article. It came from the trap I had set 12 months ago, the one I had almost forgotten about. The Holloway Advisory trademark. Noah called me 3 days after the article ran. He was laughing. "You are not going to believe this," he said. Grant tried to pivot. The article made him look like a leech, so he tried to legitimize himself fast. He tried to sign a partnership deal with a boutique firm in the suburbs. He presented himself as the CEO of Holloway Advisory. "And?" I asked, a slow smile spreading across my face. "And the boutique firm did their due diligence," Noah said. "They ran a trademark search on his brand name before signing the papers." I closed my eyes and savored the moment. Back in Part 4, I had registered the trademark for Holloway Advisory under my holding company because I could prove I had paid for the logo design, the website hosting, and the brand development. Legally, the brand belonged to Northwind Social. Grant had walked into a meeting, pitched a company he did not own, using a name that belonged to the woman he had discarded. The boutique firm's legal department had flagged the discrepancy. They contacted the trademark owner, me, to ask if Mr. Holloway had a licensing agreement to use the intellectual property. I had instructed Elena to handle it. She sent a formal cease and desist letter to the boutique firm and to Grant. "Dear Mr. Holloway, it has come to our attention that you are attempting to conduct commerce under the trade name Holloway Advisory. As you are aware, this trademark is the sole property of Northwind Social Co. You have no authorization to use this name, logo, or associated brand identity. Please cease all usage immediately, or we will seek damages for trademark infringement and brand dilution." It was the ultimate checkmate. He could not use his own name for business because I owned the brand he had built on my back. He had to explain to his potential partners why his empire was legally the property of his crazy ex. The deal with the boutique firm collapsed instantly. No reputable company gets into bed with a consultant who is being sued for trademark infringement by his former fiancé. But the real victory came from Isabella. Noah texted me late on a Friday night. She left him. She read the article. She saw the trademark letter. She packed her bags this afternoon. She told him that she does not invest in projects that are already bankrupt. I sat in my office, the city lights glowing below me. I looked at the email chain, the legal documents, the viral article. Grant had spent years curating an image of success. He thought he was a visionary. He thought he was a kingmaker. But in the end, he was just a squatter. He had been squatting in my apartment. He had been squatting in my bank account. And he had been squatting in a business identity that I had paid for. And now, he was evicted from all of them. He had lost the girl. He had lost the money. He had lost the reputation. And thanks to the United States Patent and Trademark Office, he had even lost the right to use the name he had plastered on his business cards. I turned off my computer. The screen went black. For the first time in 4 years, the ledger was finally balanced. The lawsuit arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a process server who looked bored with the melodrama of his own job. It was a civil suit claiming emotional distress, defamation of character, and interference with prospective business advantage. Grant was suing me for $250,000. He claimed that my vindictive actions, specifically the trademark enforcement and the freezing of the assets, had destroyed his livelihood. He claimed I had orchestrated a campaign of terror to punish him for bravely ending a toxic relationship. It was a Hail Mary pass thrown by a man who was drowning and decided the best way to float was to stand on my head. My lawyer, Elena, did not look worried when she read the filing. She looked like a shark who had just smelled blood in the water. "He wants a settlement," she told me, tossing the papers onto her mahogany desk. "He is betting that you will pay him $20,000 or $30,000 just to make him go away because you are busy and successful. He thinks you will view it as a nuisance fee." "He is wrong," I said, sipping my espresso. "I do not pay nuisances. I remove them." The preliminary mediation hearing took place 3 weeks later in a beige, windowless conference room at the courthouse. The air conditioning was humming too loudly, and the fluorescent lights buzzed with a headache-inducing frequency. I sat on one side of the long oak table with Elena. On the other side sat Grant and a lawyer who looked like he had graduated from law school about 15 minutes ago. Grant was wearing a suit I did not recognize, ill-fitting at the shoulders, likely bought off the rack at a discount store. He looked tired. His skin was sallow, and the arrogant shine in his eyes had been replaced by a desperate, shifty glint. The mediator, a retired judge named Mrs. Gable with glasses perched on the end of her nose, opened the file. "Mr. Holloway," she said, her voice dry, "you are the plaintiff. Please state your grievance." Grant cleared his throat. He sat up straighter, trying to summon the ghost of his old charisma. "Your Honor," he began, though it was not a trial. "Ms. Langford has systematically destroyed my life. For 3 years, she used her wealth to control me. She made me dependent on her, and when I tried to leave, when I tried to escape the toxicity, she retaliated. She locked me out of my home. She stole my car. She sabotaged my business by stealing my brand name. She has made it impossible for me to earn a living. I am just asking for fair compensation for the damage she has done to my career and my mental health." He looked at me with a practiced sadness. "I just wanted to be free," he added softly, "but she wants to bury me." Mrs. Gable looked at me. "Ms. Langford?" I did not speak. I nodded to Elena. Elena opened a binder that was 3 inches thick. The sound of the heavy cover hitting the table made Grant flinch. "Let us clarify the timeline," Elena said, her voice sharp and precise. "Mr. Holloway claims financial control. However, Exhibit A shows that Mr. Holloway had full access to Ms. Langford's credit cards for 3 years, spending a total of $42,000 on personal luxury items, including golf clubs, cigars, and trips with friends. That is not the spending habit of a controlled victim. That is the spending habit of a dependent." Elena flipped the page. "He claims Ms. Langford stole his car. Exhibit B is the title and loan agreement for the Land Rover Valor, signed solely by Tessa Langford. Mr. Holloway never made a single payment. Repossessing one's own property is not theft. It is asset management." "And the defamation?" Grant's lawyer squeaked, trying to intervene. "She publicly humiliated him at the wedding." Elena smiled. It was a terrifying smile. "Actually," she said, pulling out a flash drive, "we have the raw footage from the live stream. Mr. Holloway is the one who seized the microphone. Mr. Holloway is the one who announced, and I quote, 'She is pathetic.' Mr. Holloway is the one who ended the ceremony to humiliate my client. You cannot sue someone for humiliation when you are the one who built the stage, turned on the spotlight, and delivered the monologue." Grant was sweating now. I could see damp patches forming under his arms. That is interpretation, Grant stammered. But the business. She stole my business name. Holloway Advisory. Exhibit C, Elena said, sliding a document across the table. The invoices for the logo design, website hosting, and brand development, all paid for by Northwind Social Mr. Holloway was an employee of the brand, not the owner, and since he never filed for incorporation, the intellectual property remained with the financier. The mediator, Mrs. Gable, was flipping through the documents, her eyebrows rising higher with every page. She looked at Grant over her glasses. Mr. Holloway, she said, this binder suggests that you lived entirely on Miss Langford's dime for 3 years. You are suing her for stopping the charity? It was a partnership, Grant yelled, losing his composure. She owes me. I owe you nothing, I said. It was the first time I had spoken. My voice was low, but it carried across the table like a gunshot. And we have one final piece of evidence, Elena said. This is the one that moves this discussion from a civil annoyance to a criminal concern. She pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a security log from my office building, dated 2 weeks ago. On the 4th of this month, Elena said, Mr. Holloway attempted to bypass security at the Northwind social offices. He told the guard he was Ms. Langford's husband and that he needed to retrieve emergency files from her server. When the guard asked for ID, he became belligerent and fled. The room went dead silent. Attempting to access a secure server, impersonating a spouse, this was not just a bad breakup anymore. This was corporate espionage and harassment. Mrs. Gable closed the file. She looked at Grant with pure disdain. Mr. Holloway, she said, if this goes to trial, not only will you lose, but I suspect Ms. Langford will countersue for fraud, harassment, and legal fees. And looking at this security log, she might also press charges for trespassing and attempted data theft. Do you really want to continue? Grant looked at his lawyer. His lawyer was busy packing up his briefcase, clearly realizing he was not going to get paid. Grant looked at me. He looked for the woman who used to apologize when he was in a bad mood. He looked for the woman who used to write checks to fix his mistakes. He did not find her. What do you want? He whispered. I want it to end, I said. Right now. Elena slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a settlement agreement, but not the kind he wanted. You drop the lawsuit with prejudice, I said, listing the terms from memory. You sign a permanent non-disclosure agreement. You are forbidden from mentioning me, my company, or my employees ever again. You are forbidden from coming within 500 feet of my home or office. In exchange, I will not pursue the costs for the wedding you canceled, and I will not press criminal charges for the security breach. I get nothing? Grant asked, his voice trembling. After 3 years? You get to walk out of here without a criminal record, I said. That is more than you deserve. Grant picked up the pen. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely hold it. He signed his name. It was a messy, jagged scrawl. He realized, finally, that he could not act his way out of this. He could not charm the paperwork. He could not gaslight the timeline. He stood up. He did not look at me. He walked out of the conference room. His shoulders slumped. A man who had tried to play poker with a woman who owned the casino. I waited until the door clicked shut. Well, Mrs. Gable said, taking off her glasses, that was efficient? Thank you, Your Honor, I said. I stood up and smoothed my skirt. I shook Elena's hand. Send me the bill, I told her. It will be my pleasure to pay it. I walked out of the courthouse. The heavy doors swung open, and the noise of the city rushed in to meet me. It was loud and chaotic and beautiful. My phone vibrated in my purse. I pulled it out. It was an email notification. The subject line read, Contract signed. Global Tech Summit 2026. Northwind Social. It was the biggest deal of my career. A multi-million-dollar contract that would take my company international. I looked at the screen, and then I looked at the courthouse steps behind me. Grant was somewhere down there, walking toward a bus stop or a subway station, carrying the weight of his own failures. I did not turn around to check. I did not look back to see if he was watching me. I put my phone in my pocket and stepped off the curb, raising my hand to hail a cab. The sun was shining, the air was crisp, and for the first time in a very long time, the only name on the ledger was mine. He ended the wedding to break me, hoping to leave me in ruins, but I responded with the three things he feared most: the truth, the procedure, and a life where he no longer had the password to access me. And that, truly, is the best revenge of all. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening on your commute, while cooking dinner, or maybe from your office desk? Please drop a comment below and let me know your location so we can connect. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, please subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this story reach more people who need to be reminded that they are strong enough to stand on their own.